Guten Abend, willkommen zu meinem Talk. I've been living for 4 years in Berlin. That's the only statement I can say fluently, and that's not something I'm proud of. So for those of you whose German isn't as perfect as mine, good evening, welcome to my talk. My name is Rohan, and today I'll be talking about automating your Flutter app releases using Fastlane and Bitrise. But before that, I would like to begin by saying thank you. Thank you to all of you for showing up to this talk. I know this is the last talk of a long conference, and this is quite literally the last talk. Even in the API response, among the 4 talks that shared the same slot, this is at the bottom of those 4 as well. So we can begin by having a round of applause for all of you. This round of applause is for all of you for making an excellent decision among the 4 talks. And I know that the last talk that I gave, I know that this is the last talk of the conference, and it has both bad and good sides to it. The bad side is that since this is a 3-day-long conference, the audience can be tired. I see that you're doing well so far. I don't see any heads dozing off, so all good. Another bad thing about the conference can be that the speaker can be tired, but I assure you that's not the case. This was planted at the last moment. But it could be that I'm tired just because I was up all night trying to perfect the font of the thank you text on the last slide, which you will see shortly. On the other hand, the good thing about being the last talk of the conference is that if you feel that this was not a good talk, you literally have no time to tell anyone outside this room and make me go through a walk of shame in Game of Thrones style. So that's great. A tiny disclaimer before I move ahead. Even though the title of the talk is Automate Flutter App Releases using Fastlane and Bitrise, this talk is not sponsored by Bitrise. This talk is also not sponsored by Fastlane. And neither is the Flutter team at Google sponsoring this talk, which somewhere makes me feel that I'm leaving a lot of money on the table. But all good. The other 5 words on this slide don't even have the ability to sponsor anyone. So I maintain a speaker deck GitHub repository where I list down all my talks. And just yesterday, I checked that my last talk was from 4 years ago at the exact same conference. Not FlutterCon, since this is the first one, but DroidCon, which is happening downstairs at the same time. So I knew I was a little rusty when preparing for my talk. I did have a middle and an ending, but the beginning wasn't so clear in my head. So I revisited the rules of how to give a talk 101, and it said, when no idea in your brain lands, ask for a show of hands. That's exactly what I'm going to do. How many of you over here have used Bitrise before? Can I have a show of hands, please? All right. How many of you are using it currently for your Flutter apps? Oh, nice. Not many of you. How many of you have heard of Fastlane before? Oh, nice. A lot more. And how many of you are using it for your Flutter apps? Exactly the same. All right? All good? So I work for Delivery Hero in Berlin, and there are many teams at Delivery Hero that are doing mobile apps. My team, in particular, does a Flutter mobile app. So we are a team of 7 superhero Flutter engineers, and we built a greenfield Flutter app. So a bit more about my team. I work on the merchant app team, which is a completely Flutter app, no add-to-app functionality or anything like that. And we ship our app in 4 different products in multiple markets. So if you come from Singapore or Hong Kong or even the APAC area, you might have heard of Foodpanda. The app that we built for that region is called Panda Merchant, since we cater to the merchants of the Foodpanda app. Similarly, if you're from Austria, you may have heard of Foodora. In Chile, it's called Peridosia, and in Dubai, it's called Talabat. And we build the merchant apps for all of those brands. So I've divided the rest of the talk into 4 different parts. To understand how we automate our app releases, we'll first understand what exactly do we automate, what are the things that we work on. Then we'll understand the when part of it, what's the frequency of our releases, who does these releases, and then finally, how do we exactly do it. So to start with the first part, before we do that, we need to understand what does the team structure for my team look like. So we are the merchant app team, and it's built up of 2 cross-functional squads. Each squad has a product manager and an engineering manager, back-end engineers, front-end engineers in both teams. We share a QA engineer and a product designer, and then there's the 7 of us split across both teams. So coming back to what exactly do we release, we are a completely Flutter app. We use trunk-based development, so our main branch is called master, what others also refer to as main or dev. And every sprint, we get in business requirements, and we build features that extract a branch out of master and then go back into it. So in this example, you can see that feature F1, 2, 3, and 4 were merged back to master, and the same for bug fix B1. We operate in terms of sprints. Every sprint has a duration of 2 weeks. So this example is for sprint 11. So this completes the what part of things. Now let's head on to the when part. So when do we exactly merge these things? We have a 2-week-long sprint, and we also decided that the right frequency for us to make our releases would be at the end of these sprints. So within those 2 weeks, whatever gets done is frozen, which is a fancy way of saying nothing beyond this point goes into the next outgoing release. And that's where we stop the outgoing functionality for that release. So in this example, features F1, 2, and 3 will make it to the next release, but feature F4 wouldn't, since it wasn't merged back in time. So this completes the when part, the frequency of our releases. Now, who does these releases? As you may have guessed, the Secret 7. So all of us share this responsibility among ourselves. Since we know that a sprint lasts for 2 weeks, we can visualize how many releases there will be in the rest of the year. Then we assign one of us to have the responsibility of one release, and then it keeps rotating after 7 releases. So a release manager gets assigned. We finalize a release date, which is usually a couple of days or 5 days after the code freeze, so that we have enough time for regression testing. Then the release manager writes down the release notes of what's going out in the release. This is particularly useful for external stakeholders. Let's say there's someone who is not in our team at Delivery Hero, but is interested in what we are doing. So all they need to do is look at this document and know what we have shipped in the past few sprints, and what does our release cycle for the future look like. So we also assign, the release manager also assigns the build number once the release is out, and we keep updating the status based on where we are in the release process. For example, over here, 23.10, 11, and 12 have already been released, but 23.13 is something in progress, so the status for that says in progress. And the way we name the versions of our releases on the leftmost column, the first 2 digits denote the current year, which is 2023. The middle 2 denote which release is this for the current release. So 23.13 means this is the 13th outgoing release for this year. And then the final digit is the patch version. So if something goes wrong on a production release, we release a hotfix. So that would change to 1. If it's the second hotfix, to 2, and so on. Ideally, if everything's right, that will always stay 0. And having these releases, so if there are 7 release managers and there's 1 release every 2 weeks, this means that your turn comes after every 3 months. I understand that the release process can be stressful, but once in 3 months is something that doesn't feel stressful at all. So sharing this responsibility through good documentation helps the entire team. Now that we have covered the what, when, and who, let's get into the crux of things, which is the how. So to release an app, we follow 8 definite steps. The first one being the code freeze. I briefly mentioned this before. Here's a slightly more elaborate description of it. So every app mostly has its own translation system. So right before we are preparing our build to go out, we fetch the translations from our remote source and put it into the app's code, so that in case when the user is using the app, we are unable to connect to that remote source, we can use the fallback cache in the app itself. So that's the first step. Then we create a release branch out of it. If the release version of the outgoing release is 23.11, we'll create a branch that's called release/23.11. And then we'll go back to master and increment the release version on master. So in pub/spec, previously since it said 23.11, now that changes to 23.12. And then we send a Slack notification or a Slack message to the team that code freeze is successful, a release branch is now ready. Then we check the stability of the app using whatever Flutter offers us. So we run Flutter analyze, we run Flutter tests, and if something goes wrong, we try to fix those issues and restart the process. Usually at this point, these 2 checks should not fail, since if you're already running this on every PR, ideally everything should be fine till now. Step 3 is distributing our UAT builds. We have three environments for our app: staging, UAT, and production. Staging is where us devs make our features. UAT is where the internal stakeholders and the QA team tests the build, and production is for live users. So we distribute our 4 iOS and 4 Android apps, in total 8 apps, and we put them on App Center. Then the next step is that the QA team starts manually testing this build, which is called regression testing. In the meantime, it's the release manager's duty to have a look on Sentry and see if something's looking wrong, something that maybe the devs and the QA team fail to find, and fix those issues if they come up. Once those issues are fixed and we have a green light from the QA team, also from Sentry, we head on to step 5, which is distributing the production builds. So the UAT builds went out to App Center. The production builds go out to Test Flight for iOS. For Android, they go out to App Center and Play Store. I know you might be wondering why App Center, why not just Play Store? It's just that since all the stakeholders internally have access to App Center, we now don't want them to have access to Play Store and then test the app on another tool. So they continue testing the prod app on App Center itself. If there's ever a requirement such as in-app purchases where we have to use Play Store, then we might drop App Center in favor of Play Store for production Android apps. And then again, a Slack message is sent out that production apps are ready to be tested. Then the QA team starts a sanity test on the production app. So since they've already tested the UAT app thoroughly, it is a bit unlikely that any major issues come up on the production app, unless the dev team forgot to do a configuration check, which was certainly different on the prod app than the UAT app. Most likely at this phase, we discover backend issues, which can anyway be fixed independently of the app release process. If something still goes wrong at this point, we fix them on the release branch and redeploy production builds on the release branch itself. Other than that, the release manager also does some housekeeping on Jira to assign fixed versions to tickets, and we update the release management document, which I showed you in an earlier slide, which is present on Confluence. Once that's done, we have a green light from QA. We deploy the builds to production, which means submitting them for review, since we can't directly deploy right now. And then once we have an approval, we publish the apps to production as a staged rollout. Since we have a lot of users and we don't want all of them to break at once, we use staged rollout on both iOS and Android. Then it's the release manager's job to also create a Git tag, since that release branch will at some point be deleted. It's not nice to have so many branches on your repo lying around. We create a Git tag out of it. We merge the release branch back to master so that if there was a bug fix that was only done on the release branch, it will finally also be accessible on the master branch later on. There's a Slack message sent out to the team, and then the release manager monitors Sentry and the conversion rates for the next 7 days to see if this build is performing in expectation with what the previous build was, or doing better, hopefully. So all of this were just the release steps, and then let's see where does Bitrise fit into all of this. So when we were doing a show of hands, I realized that many of you over here don't know what Bitrise is. It's a CI/CD platform that's targeted towards mobile apps. There are many CI/CD platforms, Jenkins, GitHub Actions, but this one, when it started, was clearly suggesting that it's for mobile apps. And it offers a bunch of features like automating your testing process and your release process. But the one part that I like the most is that it has a visual interface to it, which something like GitHub Actions does not. And it also has open source steps, which you see in the screenshot over here, which are ready-made and built by the community. So if you are deploying an iOS app and the steps for that are broken down into smaller steps, you can directly use them in your workflow. Then as the third point says, it also offers insights to your workflows. Something like if your UAT workflow takes 30 minutes to execute and suddenly it drops down to 20 minutes, you can see that after which commit did that start happening, so you can narrow down the scope of the problem. Then even though Bitrise offers a graphical user interface for designing your workflows, which is great for the initial setup, you ideally want more flexibility, which is something that GitHub Actions offer. So that's why Bitrise also offers the ability to store your Bitrise configuration file, which is a list of all your workflows and all your steps, as a YAML file that's stored in your GitHub repository. So once you do this, once you start using this YAML file, Bitrise will read your repository to understand what workflows it should show you in the UI itself. So you can make any changes to this one, do different sets of configurations per branch, and that will show you a different workflow on Bitrise. This was really useful until 1 or 2 years ago when this was not there. We only had one source of truth for workflows on Bitrise. This meant that, let's say every quarter there's a new Flutter version that comes out. Now I am on Flutter 3.0, but the person who is supposed to upgrade Flutter wants to do it for Flutter version 3.3. But there's only one Flutter version we can use on our CI and CD. With this file now, all they need to do is use a different branch, change the Flutter version in bitrise.yaml on that branch, and then both of us and the rest of the team can use whatever Flutter version they like. So this is the benefit of having that configuration file, and it lives in your repository with the rest of the Flutter code. So earlier, I showed the steps of a release process, and this is an example of how it looks like for us on Bitrise. The leftmost column is step one, the code-free step. So we use some inbuilt actions, like clone repository. You don't need to write any bash scripts for that. And then you upgrade the pubspec version, you download your keys, and then you move on to step 2, which is testing your app, running Flutter and Analyze. And then step 3, which is finally using Fastlane to distribute your steps and ultimately sending a Slack notification. If you have ever tried to send a Slack notification on your own using their API, it's a bit cumbersome. But since we are using the step offered by Bitrise, all they need is our token, our webhook URL, and that's it, the message that you need to send. And you pretty much have it all. So in step 3, in the first 2 steps, you see the Fastlane logo, which is where Fastlane turns out to be useful. So for those of you who don't know, even though many of you over here do, it's an open source tool which allows you to primarily publish apps and help with code signing. So even if you have your own scripts for publishing apps, which many of you might already do, code signing on iOS is a big pain point, especially for people like me and many people in my team who have a native Android background. Understanding that concept of signing certificates and provisioning profiles took a lot of time. And even once we understood it, managing certificates and profiles in a team is not easy. As an indie dev, you can do everything via Xcode itself. But as a team, that brings some challenges. So what Fastlane offers is the ability to have a fast file in your code base. And again, just like Bitrise, where it has predefined steps from the community, Fastlane has some predefined code which you can use and execute directly. So as an example, when I was building the FlutterCon app for this conference, I also used FastFile, even though I was the only dev working on that app. So this is an example of the FlutterCon code base, and the Android directory has a FastFile in it. If you haven't been able to guess so far, FastFile uses Ruby. And you might be thinking that now I have to learn another language. You'll quickly see after the next slide that maybe you don't. So this is an example of the Android fast file, and this is the iOS fast file. And just to show you an example of the code, so this is what the Android Fastlane setup for releasing an app to Play Store looks like. All you need is to learn the basic syntax of Ruby, which is what exactly is a method. It starts at do, ends at the end keyword, and how do you write method calls or the basic syntax otherwise. So in this example, what Fastlane refers to as a lane is just a predefined set of code. Once we head into the Android directory and run Fastlane upload production from the terminal, it will run the first step, which is build app. The build app step is a custom step which I've defined on the right as a private lane, or what you refer in Dart as a private method, and it executes the Gradle method. Since you don't see the Gradle method on the screen, this means it directly comes from one of the Fastlane methods that's already open sourced. So once it executes build app on the left and the app is ready in the bundle directory, it runs upload to Play Store, which is also a Fastlane predefined lane. And all it needs is which tag do you want to upload, your service account credentials so that it has access to your store, and the path to the Android bundle. And that's it. This is an iOS example, pretty similar, except for the code on the right, where the first step says sync certificates and provisioning profiles. So this is the step where Fastlane helps with code signing. All it does is that it creates a GitHub repository and downloads all your certificates and provisioning profiles to that GitHub repository and stores them in an encrypted format. Then after that, all your team needs is access to that GitHub repository and a Fastlane password to decrypt that repository. After that, if a new dev joins your team, just give them the repo and the password. They run Fastlane sync certificates, and they have everything they need to run the iOS build on their machine or even deploy it to the store. And so one other benefit of Fastlane is that even if you're using bash scripts, you are on your own. If something changes on the Google or the Apple APIs tomorrow, you are on your own. You have to figure out Stack Overflow, ChatGPT, whatever you use, but still you're fighting the battle singularly. On the other hand, if you're using Fastlane, it is an established product. It has been open source since the beginning, and there's a big community around it. So if something goes wrong, and this happens quite often for the App Store Connect APIs, you open the Fastlane repo, you head over to issues, and someone, by the time you're there, has probably already found a fix for that. So having it open source and not using your own custom bash scripts definitely helps in this case. So that covers the how part of things as well. Now this brings me to the point that, is this 100% automation? Not at all. I never promise that. This is probably 50, 60, or 70%. But ideally, 100% automation means that there's no human intervention at all, which also means there's no manual QA engineers testing your app, or that you are not manually monitoring the release, looking at Sentry, and halting the rollout. Maybe this works for the Facebooks and Googles of the world, where they have a big infra team set up and tens of engineers are exactly solving this problem. But with a team of 7 engineers at this size and with the current business requirements that we have, we can't afford to invest that much into automating the release process just for the sake of it, that it's 100% automated. We don't want to spend first we don't want to invest time first setting this all up and then dealing with issues every day that the release was halted automatically. How do we resume it now without touching any of the automated processes? So that's where we are at right now. The combination of Flutter, Fastlane, and Bitrise works really well for us in a team of 7, even though we are not fully automated. And that's all I had to say about automating Flutter app releases using Fastlane and Bitrise. Thank you. I have 2 small things to add. So I've been mentioning my team throughout. Even though I'm the one presenting today, it could easily have been anyone over here. And what I'm presenting, it's the combined effort of all 7 of us. And it's time I put faces and names to these superhero avatars. So all of these people are my teammates, and they're all seated in the first and second row. So may I please request a round of applause from them as well. Thank you. And the last tiny thing, there's a QR code on the bottom right. This is not for the slides. I'll tweet that out. But this is for the Delivery Hero careers page. We're not hiring Flutter engineers right now, but every new mobile project that starts at Delivery Hero, Flutter is a strong contender for it. So it's highly likely that we may be hiring in the future. But otherwise, there are a lot of other open roles if you're interested. So with that, thank you, everyone. Have a nice weekend.